Good morning, Mr. Mayor, City Manager Klinger, honorable members of the council. For the record, Mike Hernandez, Reno Fire Chief.
Turn the lights
down, please. This morning I'd like to discuss, I think it is still morning, I'd like to discuss the Caughlin fire response. But before I do, there was a host of agencies that came together and contributed to the mitigation of that event. The list is too long to present at this time. However, we will be doing a more formal presentation sometime in January. However, I would like to recognize those variety of agencies that came to our assistance, as well as members of the community, several of the casino owners, hotel owners, restaurant owners that stepped up and provided meals and lodging for those victims that were displaced and those victims that were evacuated. A very heartfelt thank you to Chief Pitts and the Reno Police Department. That organization were instrumental in going door to door, house to house, neighborhood to neighborhood, waking up people in the early hours of that morning. As you know, we suffered some significant power losses in certain neighborhoods. People were without power and electricity, without the use of their phones. We had some traffic signal challenges. We had motor vehicle accidents that were impeding emergency response vehicles, and the Reno Police Department worked hand in hand closely with the fire department, and their assistance was invaluable. And the last group I'd like to recognize, and if they'll please stand up, are the investigative team that actually were on scene within hours. These are the investigators that literally put their boots on and walked the back hills of the Mount Rose area to determine where the fire started and basically come to a cause and origin that we currently are working with the ATF and NV Energy to solidify. With that, I'd like to cover the key points of the fire. During the early morning hours of November the 18th, a brush fire started in the southern boundary of the Caughlin Ranch area, and if you look at the overhead, you'll see a little push pin, and that's where we believe the fire originated from, which is just south of the Caughlin Ranch neighborhood. The fire grew into a major long-term response effort that lasted through Sunday, November the 20th. The fire was reported at 12:22 a.m. During that time, the city was experiencing 40 to 50 mile an hour sustained winds. Up in the Caughlin Ranch area, there were reports of 60 to 70 mile an hour gusts. The initial report was reported to the dispatch center at 12:22. Units responded to the Sierra Pine Haven streets. While responding within the first 2 minutes, the dispatch center received multiple calls, and of course the fire crew responded, seeing a heavy glow in the area. The call was upgraded to a full alarm assignment at 12:24. Within 8 minutes, the first unit arrived at Pine Haven and Sierra Pine and reported a significant brush fire, approximately 30 to 50 acres, burning approximately 3/4 to a mile off-road in the canyon undeveloped area. Within the first hour, mutual aid requests were made and units were being dispatched from neighboring communities. About that time, the fire had grown to about 200 acres. By Friday evening, approximately 440 firefighters were on the line working to bring the fire under control. At that time, the fire had grown to about 1,000 acres. During that time, we still had winds in excess of 30 to 35 miles an hour, gusting to 40. By late Friday evening, we were able to stop the forward progress of the fire, and I will show council in just a second. We were basically fighting the fire on 3 fronts. We had the Moana Pioneer Lane area. This is the Manzanita Canyon, where we had crews assigned. We had the Skyline, Zalezi Lane, Windy Hill area to our south. We had wind-blown embers that had impacted the Bartley Ranch area to the east of the fire area, as well as significant fire traveling on the southern edge of the Mount Rose area. By Saturday afternoon, weather conditions had changed and allowed for crews to backtrack and begin extinguishing hotspots and rekindles. The fire was 65% contained by Saturday evening. Late Sunday, the fire was 100% contained. In total, 30 homes were completely lost. Several dozen homes received anywhere from light to moderate damage, and a total of 1,946 acres were consumed. One firefighter received first and second degree burns to his face and was treated and later released. Approximately 24 firefighters were treated for minor injuries, primarily wind-blown dust and dust embers to their eyes. They were treated on scene. No one was transported to the hospital. What I'd like to do is show council how the fire progressed, and I'll just click this and kind of talk you through it. But as the fire, this is an overview of the entire fire origin. You can see the Caughlin Ranch subdivision to the top of the screen. As the fire was reported, our primary concern became containing the fire to the east side of the McCarran Loop. This is the Manzanita, what I'm calling the Manzanita Canyon. Skyline's right over here. The fire had also extended to our east and was threatening, I'm at a loss, I forgot the name of the subdivision. The Lake Ridge subdivision, it had, we had lost some homes in the southern boundary, and it was beginning to extend in, and we had deployed crews to this area down here. At the same time, the fire was growing up towards Anitra, Evans Ridge, and it had breached into the Evans Creek Canyon, and we had windblown embers going into the Bartley Ranch neighborhood. That's also started some secondary fires that we had to deploy resources to. Midway through Friday morning, a concern was the Manzanita Canyon, and I believe this is Dant Road. Initially, crews tried to stop the fire in this area. Because of the high winds and the growth, it did leap. At the same time, we started to receive assets that were beginning to work the southern boundary. These are hand crews that were starting to contain the fire along the kind of the rugged terrain along this area. Well into the early afternoon of Friday, it had breached Dant Road and actually had started to run down the Manzanita Canyon towards Pioneer. And at the same time, crews were working to contain the Bartley Ranch area and the Skyline, Zalezi, Windy Hill area, where we had a considerable amount of embers and ember starts and fires in that area. We believe that the fire originated due to an electrical event basically in this area right here. And what I'll do is I'll zoom in, and you can actually see the overhead where you can see, I'm having a little hard time with this mouse here. You can actually see some of the power lines going from north to south, and this is where we believe the fire originated. There we go. And to give council kind of an idea of the type of terrain, this is sort of a ground or a eye-level view of the terrain that the fire started in. Very hilly, very jagged, no roads. Again, this is sort of a 360 view. That's due north. If you were to do a flyover due north, you would actually be flying over the casino areas and the downtown areas. Again, this is sort of a large snapshot of the entire burn area. After action events, early into the incident, we requested and received a fire management assistance grant. This FMAG will allow us the opportunity to offset 75% of our response expenses. The other 25% will be shared by three agencies: Washoe County, the City of Reno, and the U.S. Forestry Service. At the request of the governor's requested that we apply for some state emergency funding to help offset the 25% that we would be responsible for. We are in that process, and we haven't heard back from the governor's office yet, but we feel confident that we're going to receive some funding to help offset a good part of that 25% that we're going to be responsible for. The Reno Fire Department spent the better part of 10 days after the fire visiting impacted neighborhoods, literally going door to door, making sure that residents had all the information they need. Any serious safety issues were addressed with respect to gas, electrical, partially collapsed buildings, and we assisted those residents as best we could. The last part of this presentation deals with current ongoing efforts to revegetate the area. There is some concerns with respect to flooding, if we get any type of rain or snow activities, what the runoff would look like. And also there's the long-term issue of revegetation with respect to planting the right type of vegetation so that in the spring we don't have cheatgrass, we have other types of growth that would be less conducive to fire behavior. I'd like to ask John Flansburgh if he could step up, because we are currently working with multiple partners to utilize grant funding for this process, and I'd like for him to speak on that if he could.
For the record, John Flansburgh, Director of Public Works. One of the concerns that we have is due to the vegetation that's been burnt off and the soil characteristics that when you have the high heats, your soils become hydrophobic. So when you start getting the rains coming in, the water actually wants to shed off of the soil, and it will actually become more a carrier of that soil as opposed to actually penetrating and absorbing into the soil. So we've been working with, Public Works staff has been working with Washoe County, also the Nevada Land Conservancy, and one of the items that we'd like for your consideration, and we have something on a staff report for the next meeting, is to consider maybe using the Nevada Land Conservancy as the agency that would go accept grant funds, perhaps as available from the Truckee River Fund, and authorizing the city manager to help to enter into a memorandum of understanding of how we would work that agreement due to the length that we're going to have between council meetings from the 14th to the 18th of January. So anyway, we are working diligently to come up with what those next steps are. There is a public meeting this evening to discuss, for those that have been affected, things that they can do, individual homeowners in their areas to prevent some of the items that we're concerned with runoff and soil degradation.
That concludes my presentation. I'll take any questions should the council have any.
Chief, thank you very much for the presentation and the update on this. And I noticed you didn't mention it, and I will repeat it because I know all the council people know this, but the heroism and the quick response that your people and everybody else involved with you said that list was too long, and certainly Chief Pitts and his people. But I think the point is there were 30 homes lost and others, as you said, a couple dozen severely damaged. But the other point is there were more than 4,000 homes which you rallied and were able to save and were not affected. And we're sorry for the people that happened to, but we always have to remember, I mean, the prevention of the 4,000 that could have gone, I don't know if all of them would have, but that is so important that I would hope in future presentations that you include that, because that's a salute to your people.
Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments? Councilman Sofraza.
A couple things, Chief, because we have had this discussion quite a bit over the last few years with the issue of 4-man and 3-man engine crews. A significant event like this, can you tell me what the difference would have been with a 3-man and a 4-man engine crew in response to this type of fire?
In short, council member, it enabled our crews to immediately go to work. With a 4-person crew, in this particular case, because we were fighting fire outside of structures, they were able to split and actually protect 2 homes, actually 4 homes at the same time. There were homes that they responded to that were already on fire, and they were immediately able to enter the structure while the 2 remaining members stayed outside. It, in essence, made for a quicker, more effective response in this particular case. This was a very unique fire in the sense that we had significant winds, and we had crews that are literally leapfrogging from one house, 6 houses down to another house, 6 houses down to another house. But the ability to have 4 persons on the crew, they were able to basically protect more homes at the same time.
And then my other question would be on the actual, you had touched on it, do we know the actual cause of the fire at this point?
We believe that there was some type of electrical event with the high power lines, given the high wind conditions. We've got some video footage that actually shows some marking, and shortly, within a minute or so, you can see a ground fire building in that exact same area, and the fire just progresses from that point. We've taken all of our facts and our investigators' notes and their evidence, and we've shared that with the ATF. and they're reviewing that. And once we get confirmation that there isn't any area of dispute, we'll formalize that report and that conclusion.
So what happens in that process as far as the liability, who's responsible? I understand we have the 75%, but also the 25%. As you said, there's possibility the state may jump in. But then who's responsible for the actual costs then of if it's determined that the power line was the cause?
Well, that's a legal question, and I'm going to assume that there would be some liability there, but that's...
Tracy Chase, Reno City Attorney's Office. Private individuals and homeowners would look to their own legal counsel to determine whether they have any litigation opportunities. Also their own insurance company. Also, so this council is aware, we have already as a city put in a claim for the damage to our property because we own the open space in the Manzanita Canyon. We have at least 3 parks that have vegetation that were affected, and we have open space in Lower Evans Creek. So all of those avenues are available to the individual, and those litigations, if they find there is sufficient cause to bring them, will come in the future.
So that would include the actual cost of fighting the fire as well, Tracy?
As to costs of fighting the fire, we would have to look into the possibility, determine exactly where it started, because pinpoint the jurisdictions, because if by chance it's in a Truckee Meadows jurisdiction, they may have a different law than a City of Reno jurisdiction or a Sierra Fire Protection District jurisdiction. So when the final incident report comes out, we will continue as a legal office for the City of Reno to monitor all opportunities.
And then my last question, Chief, on the overhead power lines, because there's been significant discussion about that. In fact, the utility lines come to us for a master plan, the whole utility corridor. Does fire prevention then do an analysis when they're doing the overhead lines of what the potential is for high winds or this type of situation, things that could be prevented with the overhead power structures from a fire prevention standpoint?
I know that the plan, for the record, Mike Hernandez, Reno Fire Chief, I know that the plans do get submitted via the planning process, and the Prevention Bureau does look at where they're being located with respect to how close they are to homes. But I'm not sure that covers, for example, wind resistance, high wind tolerances, et cetera. But we do look at those type of plans as part of the planning process to make sure that they're X number of feet away from a property owner, et cetera. That's probably something we would look at in the future.
Especially those areas that are high prone to fire. I mean, there's been another fire in this particular area, so. Okay,
and this area is quite a challenge, very rocky. Even from the road, there's large boulders that prevent vehicles from accessing even the dirt roads. You can see where people have taken their four-wheel drive and kind of carved their own road, if you will. We had absolutely no way of deploying our brush rigs into that area. If we were going to go to the seat of the fire, we would literally have had to have hiked on foot.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank
Councilman Hascheff.
Chief, could you just briefly, because we have our public meeting tonight at Caughlin Ranch Elementary School, could you just briefly go over the topics that are going to be addressed so the public knows if they attend the meeting?
That is going to address specifically the revegetation and the revegetation programs that are currently available to the citizens. What resources are going to be available in terms of seeding, and what funding sources citizens can either apply for. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, they're also going to discuss their vegetation with respect to their homes and fire safe behaviors with respect to their properties, and kind of better preparing the individual property owner for the next wildfire season. And unless I miss something, I think that's pretty much it. Yes.
All right. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation, the update, Chief.
Thank you, sir.
Let's move to the consent agenda. Are there any item? Pardon? Oh, is L5? All right, let's move to